Is interest in the Pac and Biggie homicides stronger abroad than it is here in the U.S. because maybe too many Americans are just tired of hearing about it over and over? Where a multi-city tour in the U.S. might not be as successful as going to Europe or Australia?
Yeah, well, these guys, both Pac and Big, they're international superstars, and so it's really interesting, like in Germany, um, Biggie's more popular. It's a strange thing that there's these just different little dynamics that take place at different places around the world, Japan and all of these, places that don't even speak a common language are still, these guys are iconic and they're superstars. And then of course the mystery surrounding their deaths is another whole area of interest to people. So I don't know if it's more popular over there than it is here. I just do know that this story never seems to fade out. It doesn't seem to die, and there's always a insatiable appetite to know more about it and to learn more about these guys, both as human beings and as artists, but also about hopefully finding some closure in what happened in the end.
I don't think the story will ever fade because these guys were in their prime when they were murdered. You could actually say they were the number one and number two rappers on earth,
Right.
which is kind of crazy that your number one and number two rappers get murdered within 6 months of each other. That's a story to tell for the next 100 years.
Right.
So I don't think it'll ever die down.
I don't. I mean, you got new documentaries being made right now today about Tupac and Biggie. What more is it to tell about Tupac and Biggie? They've been gone 23 years. You know what I'm saying? But it's still coming. And like in Australia, the people were way different. Their aspect was way different than what we have now. They was like so stoked about it. They, wanted to hear and wanted to understand the story of why. So I think that's what was good for us out there in Australia. We brought, let's say, closure to some people, or some people had a better understanding after the show was over of what really happened. Because while Greg was talking and he said and showed on this
PowerPoint.
yeah, now they see from his aspect of it. Then from me coming in and then they listening to where I was coming from and why these guys was getting killed and why things was happening in each neighborhood, they was pretty much kind of like blown away. You know what I'm saying? And I thought, man, it was the people out there wanted more than what you got out here.
So last night was an extremely interesting conversation between you, Greg Kading, the author of Murder Rap, and also with Randall Sullivan, the author of Labyrinth. Russell's book came out first, and then yours came out actually within the last 5 years, I think. And James, these two were going at it last night.
It was so damn funny.
So go ahead, tell James and I why you guys, Russel Poole and Randall Sullivan, are not on the same page. And Russel Poole is no longer alive. For those who don't know, he died of natural causes several years ago.
Right. So Russel Poole, back at the time that Biggie was murdered, shortly thereafter, him and his partner inherited the responsibility of investigating the case. And then Russ is only on it for a short period of time, relative.
Less than a year.
Less than a year. And, he had some leads that he needed to follow up on. And as a result of some of the information that he was attaining, he began to draw these conclusions. And through that process, because of things that were happening in his own personal life and his professional life, he was removed from the task force. And so he only had this 9 or 10 months to work with. And not to criticize anything that he did. He was just going through the motions. But in contrast, I was 10 years down the road. And so I had the advantage that he never had. I had 10 years of investigative effort to evaluate, assess, and then look back. I could see everything from hindsight. He was limited to this perspective that he saw for 9 months. I had 10 years. And in that period of time, over that 10 years, there was multiple other investigations going on. There was a huge racketeering investigation of death row by the FBI and the ATF. They were interviewing all kinds of people, and a lot of the information that was contained in that investigation affected or had influence on the murder investigations. And then, of course, the Rampart scandal came out, and then all these allegations about cops being involved in Biggie's murders. And so that whole investigation I had access to. So I had things that both Randall Sullivan and Russel Poole couldn't have dreamed of, having at their disposal in order to get a better picture of what took place. They were limited, and from that limited perspective, they drew conclusions. And these conclusions were demonstrably wrong. And they then began to advocate allegations against people that were factually innocent. And that's where I take issue. I don't have a problem with somebody having an opinion about it, going out and doing your own research, whatever. But before you start falsely accusing innocent people of these heinous crimes, you better have your fucking facts straight.
Can you give us some specific examples of that? Who were some of the people that he was thrown under the bus, whether that be Russel Poole or Randall Sullivan?
Well, both of them collectively, Sharitha Knight for one.
Oh yes,
being accused of being involved in Suge's attempted murder. It's ludicrous. Then, of course, the most affected by all this was an individual named Amir Muhammad, who was a close friend of David Max, who was this disgraced LAPD detective.
A.K.A. Harry Billups,
Harry
right?
Billups. Man, and the cloud of suspicion that he had to live under as a result of the claims that were in Labyrinth and as a result of the claims that Russel Poole and Randall Sullivan continued to publish, it was just irresponsible, reckless, and, in my opinion, criminal.
Now,
wait a minute.
Go
Let
ahead,
me ask
James.
you a question. Now, would it be safe to say that all the things that was going on with the police department or in the police department, did that throw the police department off the investigation of trying to catch the Tupac and Biggie killers? Because it seemed like the police were more at it than they wasn't like. They were more at it with each other. Like this guy, he was such a dick last night. I keep forgetting his name. I don't even want to remember.
Randall Sullivan?
Yes, he was such a dick. I mean, he was very irritating. I don't know if he irritated you, but just not to let no one talk. But, I mean, do you think, just back to where I was at, that what was going on in the police department, did that have anything to do with your investigations? And
Well, yeah, I mean, there were distractions that took place. The
what I'm
Rampart thing, there was a distraction. There was a lot of unnecessary time spent going down dead ends.
So do you think that's why people was looking and saying that the police, one of the theories that the police killed Biggie, Tupac?
Well, you have to follow up on those leads. When information comes in and if it's circumstantial or compelling, like, for instance, this is what happened with David Mack. David Mack commits a bank robbery, right? Shortly thereafter, he's posing in a picture and he's got this red fedora hat on, and he's got this red suit on, and his prison letters that he's sending home, he's West Side Riders and people in prison that he's celled up with, he's gangstering up. And so, okay, what's going on with this guy? And then you have other jailhouse informants coming forward and going, yeah, David Mack told me that he was involved in Biggie's murder. He knows Suge. He attends parties with Suge. And so we don't know if that's true or not, but we have to go through the motions of determining whether it is and validating that information. So you have to go through those motions.
Right.
And but you can't draw conclusions just off what a jailhouse informant tells you. And in time, at least with this case, all of these guys turned out to be lying because they were motivated by, like, well, I'm trying to move out of this prison in order to get closer to home, so I'm going to go to this prison. They all had their own motives. And, this was a high-profile case, and they thought if they threw their name in the hat that law enforcement would help them with their situations.
Wow.
And that was the game that was played on more than one occasion and with more than one informant. And that really muddied the waters. That made it very difficult to stay on track with the investigation because you're constantly going in these different directions based on these claims.
Got to follow up on everything.
Got to follow them up. So, David Mack was somebody that needed to be looked into. But at the end of the day, what I found with guys like Russel Poole and guys like Randall Sullivan, once they develop a theory, they dig their fucking heels in, no matter what information refutes their theory.
Wasn't that typical policing? I find that in a lot of cases that I work on, when we investigate a particular defendant and we find out, oh, maybe you should look at this other defendant, they're stuck on who they think did it, and they're going to trial with that no matter whatever evidence we present to them to show, hey, this guy might be innocent, but this other guy might be worth looking at. They don't want to look. Isn't that typical?
It is, unfortunately. I don't know if that's a human condition or what, but once you've invested in something, you don't want to accept the idea that, shit, I was wrong. And I put a bunch of time and energy and effort into something that is ultimately wrong. And so I think that is often the case. And this is what I've always said about Russel Poole. I'm not here to shit on the guy. I'm just saying that he lost his objectivity. And it's very clear through what happened in this investigation that he formed a conclusion built on selective information, and then he dug his heels in and said, this is what, and that led to people being falsely accused. And that's right.
I actually believe that Amir Muhammad was the trigger person of Biggie for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. It felt real. They linked him to an SS Impala somehow, some kind of way. They said he dressed like the Nation of Islam. They had a composite sketch that looked like Amir Muhammad, and I was like, okay. And then years later, I find out about Pooch, and that the Pooch theory sounds way more plausible than the Amir Muhammad. But yeah, I believe that Harry Billups, Amir Muhammad, was the killer in the beginning.
Yeah, and a lot of people did because you were only given the information that supported that narrative. And that's what the book does. It just gives you the information that supports that narrative. What the book doesn't, what Randall Sullivan's book doesn't tell you is that information came from a clinically diagnosed schizophrenic, who was in prison and had a bunch of his own psychological issues to deal with. And right off the bat, he was discredited by the LAPD as a reliable source in that case.
Wow, he lost his pension, he lost everything, and just for this case, he dedicated himself for that. I mean, did he quit the police force?
He walked away prematurely. He was just less than a year short of his pension, which goes to show you where he was at mentally. He lost his objectivity. He was frustrated with the department. He saw everything as a big cover-up. And in fact, it was just, these are the natural processes of these investigations. In law enforcement, there's all kinds of different protocols that have to be followed. There's checks and balances. And he just didn't fully understand that, evidently, and walked away from the job.
Gangsta Chronicles, we gon' tell you how it goes. If I lie, my nose will grow like Pinocchio. We gon' tell you the truth and nothing but the truth. Gangsta Chronicles, this is not your average show.